All right, so let's continue our conversation on the building the user interface. So I built the canvas, the panel. The panel is just a big image. And we have the event system, which handles just a bunch of stuff you don't want to be aware of. All I want to talk to you about is when you start creating objects. Notice that this cube, the position was way off. I'm going to reset it. I want it at position 0, world space 0. You're going to put a lot of your stuff and make a lot of your scene in world space 0, and this is fine that things are this size. Now, just note that the user interface is much bigger and it's off to the side, and that's fine because it's just rendered to the camera. And normally you don't have, so if I just drop the color of the panel down, you'll see that the cube is still there. It's still being rendered. So notice that your camera's here. The cube's in front of the camera. This is like normal space or world space. And you have this big user interface that just gets rendered straight to the camera. That's why it's big and off to the side. It's not meant to be in your obscure your view of the world you're building. And just note that usually your user interface elements are like little buttons and drop downs and text that are like around the peripheral, the sides of the screen. In the middle of the screen is usually empty because this is where your main content is. So I just wanted to make you aware of screen space and world space. This is world space. The UI is being rendered straight to screen space. So if you click on the canvas here, you see that. That's why it's all big and off to the side. But we don't really have objects. We're just making one big interface, which is why it's okay that this big panel is like blocking out everything. So in either case, you are getting close to what I'm building up here. So I'm going to turn this off and I'm going to come back up here. I made a panel, just a color. You're able to get there. So next we have text in subtext. All right, so let me turn on the working canvas. Remember, I'm in a 00 title scene. If I forgot to mention in the video, that's my bad. So we're building out the title scene, and if you just did all this in another scene, sorry, please delete it and go over to 00 title scene, and we're building out the beginning canvas. Notice that there's a little asterisk here, meaning that there's changes that haven't been saved, and if I come all the way up here, there's a little asterisk on the whole project saying that there's changes to the project. So just save often. You don't want there to be a crash and lose work. So whenever you're happy and you see the asterisk, just press Control-S. So next, have the canvas selected, go to UI. Instead of regular text, I'm going to make a text and just show you why we're doing this, but I'm going to move the text over here, and I'm going to go and make a Text Mesh Pro. And let me make this font bigger where it's almost the same size. Let me make it white so that it looks just like Text Mesh Pro. And scale it up a little bit. So hopefully it might be hard for you to tell. Maybe if I zoom up. Yeah, I can scale up my game view. Now they're both kind of getting blurred because I'm zooming up on them, but just notice that this does look cleaner than this. This is the default, and this is Text Mesh Pro. So I'm going to delete the default. I'm going to delete both. And like that was just an explanation of why we're using Text Mesh Pro. It used to be an external, a third party developed it. It used to be external asset available on the Unity Asset Store. But Unity liked it so much that they incorporated it. It's just you have to bring it in as a package. So let's bring in Text Mesh Pro. I'm going to call it, if you see here, I just called it Title Text. So I named it Title Text TMP, so I remember that's Text Mesh Pro. There's a few ways we can move this thing. You can notice that it's not a transform anymore, it's a rect transform, a rectangle, because we're in 2D space, we're on the user interface. So I'm going to leave it in the corner down here for right now. Notice I moved it with the gizmo, and I'm going to have a little talk about this thing here. So as I'm moving the game view, so one thing to know is WebGL. Oh, I don't think you had this set up. I think for you it's something like this. So notice that as I move this back and forth, notice how the text is like getting cut off. So based on the screen size, that whatever we're going to build to, and I'm changing the game view, so it's changing the aspect ratio. Notice that the UI element doesn't stay where it should, and that's because it's just in this kind of absolute position. But if you click here and say, no, click here, I want to clamp it to the bottom, it happens to be in the bottom left corner, and if I move it, I'm saying always clamp it down the bottom left corner, and as I move it, notice how it stays relative to the bottom left corner where the UI is when I'm moving the game scene. So these are super useful. These are like stretchy mode. This is like absolute position, but I'll just use these pinning. So usually UI elements are in some corner area, bottom left, bottom center, what have you. And so whenever I figure out where I'm placing it, I'll just pin it, because then it stays no matter what the aspect ratio. And this is super hard to deal with. It's a common issue. All these mobiles and computer screens all have different screen aspect ratios, different number of pixels, and it's crazy. They don't really usually use an abstract positioning system. Usually it's relative. So what I wanted to say up here is that we're in free aspect. Well, I went and created a new aspect ratio for the game. I called it WebGL, and I did a fixed resolution of 960 by 600, and that's how I got this one here. WebGL with an aspect ratio of 960 by 600, and that clamps it what we're actually going to see. And the reason I did that is because if I go to the build settings and I click on, I think it's player settings, yes, we're going to build for WebGL or HTML5. We are going to create a series of HTML and JavaScript files, and that's what WebGL is. It's a graphics library that runs on HTML, our web browser. The default settings are 960 by 600. Yes, you can change that. We're not going to. It's a nice size. It's so smaller than most monitors, so you know that it'll be sized correctly and it won't like fall off the monitor screen. So that's where I'm getting 960 by 600, width by height. All right, so that's why I'm setting this to WebGL 960 by 600, our game view. So no matter what size it is, notice that the aspect ratio of 960 by 600 are almost like an HD, a little bit wider, but it is in landscape. It's wider than it is higher. All right. And so this is going to be important because we're building these user interfaces. We need to know the frame, the size that we're going to be rendering at for the player. So this is really important. In either case, this is our title text. So you're going to type in your game title. Now I'm just going to make it a little bit longer. And so this is a component down here, Text Mesh Pro Text. Here you input your text and you have a bunch of settings similar to any type of text editor like Word doc, alignments and font size and bolding and color and the type of font. But for fonts, you have to go and like download them and bring them into your Unity package. I'm not really gonna. If you wish to do it, you do it. I'm using a default font. I'm not requiring you to use anything but that. So since it's a title text, we kind of want it to be in the middle, right? So one thing we can do is we can manually position it, or we can say, no, I want you to be pinned in the dead center. And notice that the position changed because we're pinning it offset from the dead center. So if I just 0, 0, notice it got positioned in the dead center. Great. One thing to note is that there's this yellow box around it, width and height, and if your text is too long, it'll just get cut and like get wrapped and wrapped. So width is going to be super important. Yeah, you can play with the gizmo here, but usually I'll just open up the width like this. And it depends what you want. If you want it to be super long, that's great. You can add some height to it, whatever. So this is my main game title. All right. And it's at position 0, 0, or you can move it up a little bit. And that was with position X, position Y. And you can play with this more. You want to bold it. You want to increase the font size. You can change the color. You can do what you want. But it's technically I want to center it. So center align vertically and horizontally. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to call this my subtitle. Now, for a person just coming in, the title alone might not make sense to like what exactly going on. Sentence that explains the game. Like what is going on? What do I need to know? So usually the subtitle, I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller. So font of maybe 28 or whatever. And you can play with the font size, you can play with the width and the position, but I want a main title and a subtitle. The subtitle, again, is meant to explain and more in depth. Just give me like a sentence description of your game. So for mine, we're doing bubble sort in 3D. That's the name. But an average person off the street wouldn't know what that is. So an interactive 3D trainer on a computer science sorting algorithm. You can write what you want, but at least that sentence, it's somebody runs this app, this software, and they, at a moment's notice on the title screen, they know exactly what's going on. Title, subtitle, and the color of the game. And let's see what's next. So we have our 3 buttons. Great. So remember to save, Control S. Now the next thing we're going to do is in our canvas. Turn that on. I'm going to create a button text mesh pro. Move it down. It's centered up on the middle. That's fine. You can kind of move this around and see what it's going to look like. So that's great. Now the way a button works is underneath is the label. So we're already on the title scene or the home scene, whatever. We're going to have intro. And again, you can change the size of it. It just seems to me that I can go up to the button and it's a little long, it's wide, so maybe I'll just bring the width down. That's up to you. But I can call this button intro. Duplicate. Call it button tutorial. Move it down. And go into the text for button tutorial and just call it tutorial. And duplicate, call this button level 1, and call this level 1, and I'm going to move it down. Make sure you move the button, not the text. And I got my 3 buttons, and they have nice spacing between them, and I can move this to make sure everything's sized correctly. That's great. And I'm going to click play. So one thing to note is that I've maximized on play, so this on. So if I turn this off and click play, and now that you saw that color change is active, you notice I can change the buttons. They basically click, get muted. They look like they're pushed in. They get like a darker gray when you click them, but nothing's happening. But at least they click. And if you like maximize on play, you click that on and then click play, and then you get your game view nice and big. It's up to you what you want. But intro, tutorial, level 1. Notice that they're clickable. They're clicked, but they just don't do anything. That's great. We're getting closer. So let's create our first script. So it's common to have like a scene manager and have it as like an extra its own object, which you have here. But then I was like, you know, that's kind of overkill for you guys. I just went with this canvas UI function. So anyway, you're going to right click, create a C# script. And I'm just going to call it, and this, I would say UI functions. So these are all the functions. This is like the UI. You can call it the UI manager, the UI functions, doesn't matter. Probably UI manager is probably best. But whenever you name the name of the file, this is the first time you created a script, This is the details of the script. The script happens to be small, so you can see all the text. But if it's longer, like this one, you can scrub through it all. But at least it gives you some preview, a small snippet. It's not good. You don't actually write the script in this. But you can go over here, and at least you can say like public class UI functions. So I just want you to note that the name of the file is the name of the class within it. So be very careful to name your file right away, and don't do something like this where you say create C# script and just press the enter key, and you get this default name, new behavior script, but you don't, and notice that the class is the same name, but you don't like that name, so you want to change it to my UI manager, right, or whatever you can call it. But now you're going to get an error because you have the name of the file is UI manager, but the name of the class is new behavior script. So if I double click it and open it in, this is Visual Studio. So because I double clicked in Unity and because Visual Studio's got its little Unity plugin, it opens up the whole project in Unity. It was already opened, that's why it was super fast. But here's the basic script. And if I click play, I was hoping that the error would get generated, but I think I have to click play. Maybe in the new Unity, they usually when you name the file different than the class, you'll get an error and Unity won't run. But it looks like they allow that now. In either case, I'm going to go with the standard convention that it's always been with Unity. Maybe with 2019 they updated it, that the file name has to be the same as the class name. So this was incorrect. I'm going to delete it. So we have this file, UI functions, right? And the class within it is UI functions. I'm just going to double click it. This is a basic C# script for Unity. You got some using statements up here. These are different libraries, external packages of code that somebody else written that you can use. Notice these are gray. They're not currently being used, but Unity Engine is white. It is being used. So public class, this is our class, just our code that it's all going to live within this class in the script. It's inheriting, that's what this symbol means, the colon, from mono behavior. If I hover over it, it's a class from Unity Engine. It's just called mono behavior. It's just the legacy naming of their code. But this gives this script features like you can make it a component on a game object. You can drag it onto a game object and it'll work. It'll work in your game. You also get access to methods like start and update, meaning start, whatever code is written here will run right when the game starts. Very useful for initiating stuff. And yeah, the update method, among others as well. But the update is called once per frame, basically every cycle of the game, which is really useful. And it can be 30, 60, 90 times per second based on however the strength of the computer and how intense the app is. But these are going to be very useful and they're coming from this mono behavior. But I'm going to get rid of them. We just have public class and it's empty. And notice that it's yellow here, meaning there's a change over here, yellow. I'm going to press Control S. You might see there's an asterisk here, meaning the script has changed. Press Control S, it went green. And if you click back to Unity, if you look down here real quick, this means it's compiling. And notice Unity freeze and it compiled the script and everything's great. All right. So the easiest way I thought about this for you guys is just drag the script and we'll put it at the root of the canvas. So I just dragged the script onto canvas. If I clicked here, it's right down here, UI functions. I can even remove it. You can drag it over here. That's another way to do it. Remember, the inspector is just showing components on this object. You can even say add component. Nope, remove that. Add component, and we can search for UI functions. There it is, and we can add it that way. So multiple ways. At the end of the day, you're assigning the script as a component object onto this game object, this meta object. So now this script lives in the scene, but the script doesn't do anything. It's empty. So the first thing we can say is we can write the start method. Notice it kind of filled out some stuff automatically as I was writing it, but it's a private method, only available within the class. No other class can call on it. It's void, meaning it will return nothing. It just runs a bunch of code. It's not going to return anything. The name is start. It's a special function, which means it'll run once, only when this script first becomes alive. And this symbol just means it's a method. These parentheses, and if there's anything in here, you're sending input in to make use of it, input coming from somewhere else. But it's not, it's the simplest method. Nothing in, nothing out. And I just want to use the debug. Notice I have this IntelliSense thing down here. It's trying to see what I'm trying to write out. And yes, I want to use the Unity Engine.debug class. And within debug, I want to use the log method. This writes to the log. You can put anything in here. But this is, you usually put a string in here. You do double quotes for a string or text. You can write like hello world. This is the basic thing you write all the time. This is my first script. And then when you're done with the writing the script, there's double quotes at the beginning and the end. But notice there's a red squiggle. There's an error. It's saying a semicolon is expected. Okay, put the semicolon, the error goes away. We have all yellow, no red. A semicolon is needed to terminate each command line, each line of text. So it's done. I pressed Control S. There's no errors on the Visual Studio side. We'll go back in, let it compile, and we'll see if there's any errors on the Unity side. We have to go into the console. There's no errors. We're doing great. The script is attached to my canvas. I'm going to click play. And notice when we click play, we get hello world is my first script. We have one notification. This notification, warning, error, none of those. We just have a notification. That was the log message we sent. So at noon in 19 seconds, this message was generated. It was a debug log coming from Unity Engine. And who created it? Down here, the start method from UI functions. And if we double click on it, it'll show you the line of text that generated this message. Super useful to debug, but this is your first script, and this is your introduction to the console. You want to pay attention to it. A lot of important stuff will come through there. So the next line of code, we're going to use the scene manager, and I'm just going to steal. This is my fully worked out one. You're not going to have to know all this yet. All we need to know is that we're going to use scene management, so we need a new library. So using Unity Engine, using Unity Engine.scene management. Notice it's gray because we have no lines of code actually directly referencing it. But we're going to create one public method. Public, meaning other classes, other objects derived from other classes, can reference this message. This can use this method. It's void. It will return nothing. It's just going to run some code. The name is set scene, capital S, camel case. So for classes and methods, we use uppercase camel case. For variables, lowercase camel case, meaning the first word is lowercase. Scene name, set scene. So this method, you can tell by these parentheses, is going to receive a variable. This variable is of type string. The default or basic ones are integer, float, or decimal. String or Boolean, or true or false. And for Unity, vector 3 and game object are very common. So we're going to receive a string. It's going to be called setName. Someone else is going to send the string to this method. We're going to use that string and pass it into this call. We're going to use a scene manager. So the scene manager, if I go to File, Build Settings, this is the scene manager. This is how we're going to jump between our scenes. I click this button, I'm going to jump to this one. Click the button, jump to this one, right? So we need somebody to manage these scenes, and Unity has that thing. It's called Scene Manager class. So you go scene manager dot, we're going to use a method within it. And it's a method called load scene, capital L, capital S. It receives in a parameter. Whatever we pass in this case a string, it's going to try and load that script, that scene. So whenever we call this method, we pass in the name of a scene, that gets sent to the scene manager, and we try to load that scene. That's it. Save this out. Jump back to Unity, let it compile. And now we have to tell these buttons to do stuff when they get clicked. UI is already set up for us. Just scroll down here, on click. When the user clicks this button, what do you want to do? Currently, nothing is happening. Press the plus sign. We're going to do something. At runtime only, when the user clicks on it, it needs to know what it's running. So first, remember, scripts or classes or objects are always living as component objects on game objects. So it's like, what's this game object where we're going to run some code? Well, I put the script up here on canvas. And it says, okay, there's which of the component objects will this method be on? Well, I've been writing the UI functions. Notice there's others. There's other components living on the canvas game object. That's okay. But I'm interested in the script I wrote, which will live as a component object on this game object called canvas. And I'm going to call UI functions. And what are you going to call within it? So there is other methods, and some of this is coming from mono behavior, inheritance, and what have you. But I'm really interested on this right here. Set scene. This is the method I created. And it receives a string. So the way it is with a button normally just calls methods that don't have any parameters, don't have any input, because a button is just a click. There's no other additional information. It's a very simple user interface element. But you can say for this button, call this method, and this method accepts a string. And I got to go look at my scenes, and it's the intro button. So it should be calling this scene. And I write it out, the string, 01 intro scene. All right, so when the intro button's called, it'll call set scene method in the UI functions instantiated object on the canvas game object, and it'll pass a string to it, 01 intro scene. Yep. Button tutorial, do the same setup. We're going to call UI met function set scene. This one is going to call 02 tutorial scene. And button level 1 will do the same. It will look on the canvas object. It'll look into the UI functions component object, and it'll use the set scene. And this is 03 level 1 scene. So be careful how you're writing. Either just do Control-C, Control-V from here, or just make sure you're spelling it right. So now, when we click any of these, we'll go into that scene. So just note that my scenes have stuff in it. Yours don't. You will go to an empty scene. So if I click on level 1, we do go to 03 level 1 scene, which for me, I already had a little home button I made. I'm not going to ask you to make the home button here, but just know that I can go to level 1, I can jump back. Tutorial, jump back. And intro is more built out, but I can jump back. All right, but at least for you, you jump into an empty scene with no buttons, so you're dead in the water and you have to unclick play. But test each button, make sure it goes to an empty scene, and check the name of the scene and make sure it's correct. That was tutorial, that's correct. Click this one, that's level 1, that's correct. And click this one, that's intro, that's correct. So I'm not going to make the home button here, but I'm going to have you think about if you could do it by yourself, and then next week I'll show you it. It's actually using the same method, it's just using different strings. So let's see if you can figure out how to build a canvas with just a home button on your 3 scenes, and that home button returns back to the title scene. But I'm going to do that next week. So at least you have the structure of your project. Remember, file save. You've done a lot, so you should definitely be doing git add, git commit, git push, or Google Drive.